You could almost hear the silence, thick, suffocating, the kind of silence that presses against your chest like a weight. Outside, the air simmered with the Carolina summer, sticky, still. But inside the Colgrave plantation house, the walls held their breath. A baby stirred in the nursery. The wind tapped against the shutters once, then fell still again. And in the master's chamber stood Martha, barefoot, drenched in sweat, heart a drum inside her ribs. The candle beside the bed had nearly burned out, its last flame flickering, like a warning. Master Edwin Colgrave lay half-covered by linen sheets, his chest rising and falling in slow, drunken rhythm. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. Martha's grip on the blade tightened. It wasn't the first time she'd stood by his bed in the dark, but this time, she hadn't come to obey. She had come to decide, to end. The knife in her hand was no kitchen tool. It was sharpened with purpose, honed for days beneath the stairs while no one watched. A stolen handle, a repurposed edge. She had made it herself, and tonight it would do what no prayer had ever done. She leaned closer, his lips moved. Maybe a dream, maybe a name. She didn't care. The blade hovered just above his throat, the skin pale, soft, unguarded. 1 second of hesitation. One last breath. Then, a clean slice. The sound was almost delicate, like cloth tearing. A wet gasp escaped him. His eyes shot open, confused, then glazed. His hands twitched but never rose. He tried to speak, but only gurgled. The blood came, fast, thick, and dark, rushing down his chest like spilled ink on paper. Martha didn't move. She watched. She watched the man who had once owned her, who had taken her body and her dignity, die by her hand. He reached once, toward her, toward the knife still buried in his neck, then fell limp, forever. Just beyond the door, his wife and 2 children slept soundly. The baby let out a faint sigh and rolled over. Martha stepped back slowly, breathing hard. The blood had soaked the white linen, staining it crimson. It dripped onto the wooden floor in soft, rhythmic. Her bare feet left faint red prints as she turned toward the door. Imagine being there, watching a woman, enslaved and invisible, reclaim her voice in the most final way possible. Not with a scream, but with steel. She paused at the doorway, looked back once. The body on the bed didn't move. No alarms, no cries. Only the slow, creeping pool of justice inching its way across imported cotton sheets. Outside, the cicadas screamed. Inside, only the dead made noise. But why this night? Why now? What had Martha endured that drove her past fear, past consequences, into this terrible, perfect moment of vengeance? What happens to a soul after it chooses the blade? And how had no one seen her breaking all along? By day, the Colgrave plantation looked like a portrait painted for pride. The veranda stretched wide like open arms. Magnolia trees framed the front steps. White columns rose high, carved with delicate vines. Inside, polished wood floors shone, like mirrors, and velvet curtains swayed in the warm breeze. The master's daughter, Rebecca, often sat at the grand piano, letting soft waltzes drift through the halls like perfume. Sweet tobacco lingered in the parlor, mixing with the faint scent of lemon oil rubbed into the banisters each morning. To outsiders, it was a vision of grace, wealth draped in manners, cruelty disguised as civility. But behind that vision, just steps beyond the rose garden, was another world. The slave quarters. There, time moved differently. Wood cracked beneath calloused feet. Mud stuck to the hems of skirts. The air was thick with smoke, flies, and sweat. Shouts echoed from the fields before dawn. The scent of mildew mixed with the coppery sting of dried blood. Children coughed through the night. Mothers nursed bruises as they stirred pots over smoldering fires. No silks, no piano, just bare skin and back-breaking labor. And in the middle of it all was Martha. She woke before the sun, made the master's tea, then scrubbed the same floors that carried whispers of her own pain. She moved with practiced silence, fast enough to not draw scorn, but never too fast to appear eager. Her eyes stayed low, but nothing escaped her gaze. She could smell the rot beneath the wallpaper, the molding bread served to other slaves, while the master's family dined on roast duck. She noticed the difference between how the mistress clutched her pearls during storms and how she clutched her children during whippings. Imagine living like that, watching luxury pass through your fingers while your stomach twisted from hunger. Imagine cooking meals you were never allowed to taste, changing bed sheets stained with your own blood and being told to be grateful. Every wall had ears. Every glance could become a lash. But Martha had learned long ago, silence was armor. Stillness was survival. One summer afternoon, just weeks before the murder, Martha was ordered to serve mint juleps on the veranda. There were guests, neighboring planters and their wives, bloated on bourbon and pride. Master Edwin laughed as he described the docility of his household. His cousin made a comment about Martha's posture, asked if she was trained in more than housework. They all laughed. Martha did not. Her hands trembled only once, and no one saw. That night, she slept on the floor of the laundry room, curled against the wall, listening to the faint sound of distant thunder. Her sister Ruthie slept beside her, still healing from a punishment that no one would speak of. Her back oozed through the bandages. The room smelled of vinegar, burnt fabric, and pain. And still, Martha rose at dawn. Each morning she stepped through that invisible line, from the filth of the quarters into the gold-trimmed halls of the house, as if nothing bled the night before. Two worlds. One roof, two versions of life, one always kneeling to the other, and no one wondered how long that could last. There were other signs. The whisperings in the cookhouse. The pages torn from an old Bible Martha kept hidden under her cot. The passages, marked in charcoal, always the ones about wrath, justice, swords. Once the mistress noticed the missing knife from the cellar. She scolded the cook, searched the cabinets, then forgot. Martha didn't forget. She remembered everything. The contrast wasn't just in clothing or comfort, it was in humanity. The Colgraves dined like kings while their slaves chewed on cornmeal, mush, and silence. Their baby cried for milk while a slave child wept from infection. Their prayers asked for blessings. The slaves' prayers asked to live another day. It was a house divided, not by walls but by bloodlines and boot heels. And beneath that same roof, Martha moved like a shadow, present but unseen, breathing but unheard, until the night she chose to stop being invisible. But cruelty alone doesn't ignite rebellion. What betrayal pushed Martha beyond endurance and turned her silence into strategy? Before the blade, before the silence, there was a promise, and like most promises made by masters to the enslaved, it was a lie wrapped in honey. It began during planting season, spring of 1856. The fields were alive with the scent of churned soil and crushed magnolia petals. The master, Edwin Colgrave, was in rare form, smiling, boastful, with a cigar clamped between his teeth and sweat slicking back his golden hair. He called Martha to his study, not the kitchen, not the garden, the study. That alone should have been warning enough. She entered with her eyes down, hands clasped, breath shallow. He didn't shout, didn't curse. Instead, he offered her a seat. And then, the lie. He said he'd been watching her. Noticed her discipline, her quiet, her loyalty. And for that, he said he'd reward her. Her mother, Ruthie, could be spared the field work. Her youngest brother, Elvin, would be allowed to learn to read. And Martha herself? If she remained obedient until the harvest, he'd manumit her. Free. His word. "You're not like the others," he said, sipping from a silver flask. "You're almost civilized." That word twisted in her gut like a blade. She left the room trembling, not from fear but from something more dangerous, hope. For weeks she carried that hope like a candle against the wind. She worked faster, endured longer. She even avoided the eyes of overseers, certain her reward was near. Her sister warned her. Her mother wept when she heard the tale. Men like him don't give. They only take. Martha didn't want to believe it, but belief died quickly when the nights changed, when the master summoned her after dark, when the doors locked behind her. He never struck her. He didn't have to. He used silence like a knife, guilt like rope. Each visit, he whispered more promises. You're different. You're special. Don't ruin what I'm giving you. One night he leaned over her and said, "When you're free, remember who gave it to you." That was the moment the candle blew out. Because by then she knew freedom wasn't coming, and neither was mercy. The final betrayal came just days before the murder. It was a Sunday morning. The bell had rung for church. Slaves lined up in ironed rags, singing hymns they barely understood. The master sat with guests under the oak tree, and in front of everyone he laughed. "I've decided what to do with my little prize," he said, pointing to Martha as if she were a trinket on a shelf. "I'll gift her to my cousin Caleb for his wedding. Let's see how long he can tame her." The men chuckled. Even the women smirked. Martha didn't move. Her face didn't twitch. But inside, something cracked. She didn't sleep that night. Not the next either. She began slipping away between chores, vanishing into the cellar, the tool shed, the forest line. She studied the house, memorized patrol routes, counted footsteps between rooms, timed how long the guards drank during supper. She found the knife behind the cookhouse, a rusted piece of iron from a broken plow. She spent 3 days sharpening it. She kept it wrapped in cloth, hidden beneath loose floorboards in the laundry, quarters, and while the other slaves prayed for deliverance, Martha prepared to be it. Imagine the courage, or the madness, to stand against a man who claimed ownership of your body, your family, your future. To plan his death with the same hands that once poured his wine. But Martha wasn't just reacting. She was choosing. She was becoming. By the time Edwin touched her again, she didn't flinch. By the time he whispered another lie, she wasn't listening. She was counting his heartbeats. Every betrayal had become a number, every promise a nail in his coffin. She no longer feared what came next. She feared only waiting too long. She spoke to no one, not even her mother. But when Ruthie looked into her eyes one night, she paused and said, "Don't go where I can't follow." Martha didn't answer, because some roads, some vengeance, must be walked alone. But even rage has rules, and once the line is crossed, there's no going back. What final moment pushed her to pick up the blade and carry it into the master's chamber? The day before the murder passed like any other. On the surface, hot wind curled through the tall grass. The birds in the pines screamed louder than usual. Even the dogs seemed restless. But inside the Colgrave estate, the routine was undisturbed. Breakfast was served. Orders were barked. Children played under the veranda while their mother read from a satin-bound prayer book. And Martha was watching. Every movement was precise. Every breath measured. She swept the dining room slowly, noting the missing boards near the hearth. She refilled tea without blinking as the mistress gossiped about a neighbor's daughter. She folded sheets with such perfect symmetry, you'd think her mind wasn't racing. But it was. She was thinking about the key that hung from the hook near the master's coat, the one that opened the drawer beside his bed, the one where he kept his flask, his coins, and sometimes his whip. She was thinking about the floorboards, the ones that creaked and the ones that didn't. She was thinking about the knife, wrapped in old cloth, hidden beneath her bed for 5 nights now. She had taken it out every night, just to hold it, to feel the weight, to remind herself that death was no longer a visitor. It was a companion. That night, the Colgraves hosted guests, a small supper, gathering 2 neighboring families. They dined on duck and candied carrots. Martha served each plate. Her hand brushed against the master's once. He didn't flinch. He grinned. She didn't smile back. The room smelled of roast meat, wax candles, and brandy. But beneath it all, if anyone had paused long enough, they might have caught the scent of something else. Resolve. She moved like smoke. Through the parlor, past the stairwell, into the kitchen. Every step was familiar, but this time it was different. This time she was not surviving. She was circling, waiting. The guests left just before midnight. The master drank 2 more glasses of whiskey, laughed at something the mistress said, then disappeared into his study. The house slowly dimmed. The candles were snuffed, doors closed, and the silence grew heavy. Can you feel it? That moment when the night folds in on itself, when time seems to pause, as if it knows something unspeakable is about to happen. That's what Martha stepped into. At 1:12 a.m. she left her quarters. The moonlight was sharp, cutting through the slats of the windows. Her bare feet moved like whispers across the floor. She wore a faded shift. No shoes, no apron. Just the blade, pressed against her thigh, wrapped in cloth. She passed the baby's room first, heard the soft exhale of sleep, passed the mistress's chamber, no sound but breath and dreams. The master's door stood half closed. Inside she could hear the familiar rhythm of his snore, heavy and slow. A man drunk on his own safety. She paused. 1 breath. 2. She entered. The room was still, but her mind was not. It raced with 1,000 voices, her mother's warnings, her sister's cries, the lies, the promises, the nights. All of it clanged inside her like a warning bell, but her hands, steady. She moved to the drawer, opened it without a creak, removed the flask, the coins, and placed something else inside. A folded piece of cloth. Red. Just a square torn from one of her old dresses. Then she turned and stared at him. The man who had taken her childhood, her body, her freedom, who told her she was almost human if she behaved. She stood there for nearly a full minute, not trembling, just breathing. What would you do if you were her? If every path led back to pain? If the only future left was vengeance? The blade slipped into her hand like it had always belonged there. She took 1 step forward. The floor didn't creak. Outside, a dog barked once, far off. Inside, the house held its breath, and in the next moment, with no God watching, Martha would rewrite the ending to her story. But how do you kill a man and make sure he never returns, not even in memory? He didn't wake up. Not when the door creaked open. Not when she crossed the room. Not even when she raised the blade. The candle at the bedside had burned low, a halo of wax pooling at the base, flickering shadows across the master's sleeping face. He was sprawled across fine linen sheets, one hand resting on his chest, the other hanging limp over the edge of the bed. His boots were still on. He hadn't even undressed. Drunk, arrogant, comfortable. Martha stood over him in silence. Her breath was shallow, but her hand did not shake. Not this time. The blade in her grip had been honed for days. She had tested it on kindling, then rope. She knew its bite. She had even whispered to it. Not prayers, but memories. Of pain. Of her sister's broken ribs. Of her mother's scarred back. Of every time this man had pulled her into the darkness and called it favor. Now she brought the blade to his throat, and for a moment, everything froze. Imagine that second. The second before no turning back. The second when a life, your life, has been nothing but chains and screams, and the only freedom left is in blood. She pressed down. The knife cut clean. The sound wasn't a scream. It was a gurgle. Wet. Muffled. His body jolted once, a spasm. His eyes shot open. His mouth tried to form words, confusion first, then fear, but he couldn't speak. The second cut was deeper. He flailed. His boot thudded against the bedpost. His fingers grasped at the air, at the sheets, at nothing. Martha didn't move. She stood and watched as the blood spilled, hot and fast, soaking through the white linen, dripping down his chest like wine spilled from a cursed goblet. It stained everything: the pillow, the collar of his shirt, the tips of her fingers. His lips moved once more. No sound came, only a final breath. And then silence. Real silence. He was dead. For the first time in his life, Edwin Colgrave couldn't take anything from anyone ever again. Martha looked down at the knife, still slick, still warm. She wiped it on his robe. Then she took the flask from his drawer and poured its contents into the corner of the bed, soaking it with the very liquor he had always sipped while making threats sound like blessings she didn't burn the house. That wasn't the plan. This wasn't chaos. This was judgment. She placed the blade beneath his pillow, not hidden, just tucked, as if daring the world to understand what had happened here. The room still smelled of tobacco and sweat, but now there was something else, the metallic sting of death, thick, inescapable. She turned to the door, walked to it, opened it. The hall was quiet. The baby stirred once but didn't wake. The mistress snored softly behind her door. Outside, a cicada screamed, and then nothing. Martha stepped into the hall. She did not run. She walked, past the nursery, past the parlor, down the back stairs, her feet leaving faint red prints that quickly faded into the wood. She passed no one. She was a ghost in her own story now, and ghosts do not beg for mercy. Out in the night, the air was warm and wet. Fog clung to the ground like a shroud. Dog barked in the distance, then went silent. A neighbor, years later, swore he saw a woman walking barefoot down the lane that night. He said she looked straight at him, but her eyes didn't see him. He never told anyone else what he'd seen. By sunrise, the master's body had cooled. The blood had crusted black against his chest. His wife found him first. She screamed so loudly the kitchen girl fainted. And Martha, gone. Not a trace. Not a note. Not a sound. Just the knife. And the silence. What happened to Martha after that night remains a mystery. But the chaos she left behind would haunt Charleston for decades. Morning came heavy and late. The Charleston sun usually poured over the Colgrave plantation like gold, casting long shadows on white columns and green lawns. But that morning, it rose behind thick gray clouds. The house did not sing with birds or servants. It screamed. The mistress's wail echoed down the staircase, sharp and endless. A maid vomited in the hallway. The children were rushed outside, confused and barefoot. The body remained in bed for nearly 2 hours before anyone had the courage to touch it. The sheriff arrived by noon. He brought hounds, chains, and questions. No answers. All the enslaved were rounded up and locked in the barn. No water, no shade, just heat and fear. One by one, they were pulled out and questioned, beaten, threatened. No one spoke, not because they didn't know, but because the silence was sacred. Martha was one of their own, one of the quiet ones, the ones who smiled when they needed to and vanished when danger stirred. She had never raised her voice, never stirred trouble, but now she had done what generations only dreamed of. She had cut the head off the master and vanished like wind through reeds. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said she escaped north, dressed in the mistress's finest shawl. Others whispered she had help, maybe from the cook, maybe from a white abolitionist hiding in the nearby marsh. One child claimed she saw Martha walking on water. No one ever found her. The nearby parishes were warned. Wanted posters were drawn, crude sketches of a dangerous negress with scars on her left wrist. Rewards were offered. Dogs were sent into the swamps. Nothing. Some said she was caught and lynched in secret, her body thrown into the Ashley River, but no body ever surfaced. And not a single plantation ever confirmed it. To the Colgraves, it was humiliation. Their patriarch, their proud Edwin, who once bragged about taming even the wildest of slaves, had been murdered in his own bed, not by a man, not by a rival, but by a woman they called property, a woman who bled, who endured, and who struck back. The family left Charleston within the year. The house changed hands twice before being abandoned. Locals said it felt cursed, cold. A young girl who broke in during a summer dare claimed she saw a woman in white standing at the top of the stairs, her hand dripping red. She never returned. The story of Martha was never printed in Charleston's newspapers, too dangerous, too shameful, but it lived on in whispers. By firelight, older women told the tale in code. The one who made the master quiet. Young men recited her name like a prayer before secret meetings in the woods. Children etched a single M into tree trunks, not knowing what it meant, only that it meant resistance. She became more than a slave, more than a killer. She became myth. But behind the myth was something real. A woman, a wound that fought back, a quiet scream that finally shattered the ceiling of obedience. Imagine it. The legacy of a single act. Not a war, not a riot. Just one knife, one night, one woman who had nothing left to lose, and everything to avenge. And yet, Martha was never celebrated because her story was dangerous, because it didn't fit the narrative of the loyal, submissive house servant, because it asked too many questions. What if others followed? What if they too stopped waiting for justice and started becoming it? That fear echoed across plantations for years. Mistresses triple-locked their doors. Masters changed sleeping arrangements. Some even began carrying pistols under their pillows, all because of Martha. She didn't start a revolution, but she sparked a tremor, and tremors shake foundations. To this day, historians debate whether she existed at all, or if she was a blend of multiple stories passed down through generations of Southern black families. But the details, the scar on the wrist, the knife beneath the pillow, the baby sleeping just feet away, they appear again and again in oral histories, which means someone remembered. Maybe the truth is this: Martha's story didn't survive because it was pretty. It survived because it was powerful, because it dared to show what happens when the oppressed stop begging for freedom and take it. Stories like this must never be forgotten. And if you're still with us, there are many more waiting to be told. Stay tuned.